A very warm welcome everyone to the first session of EA Global Summit 2022 Day 1. This is Juhi from the EA Global Summit organizing team. Thanks to everyone for your continual support and interest for EA Global Summit. This year, we are planning to conduct the event for 2 days. The first day is for 3 free trainings and workshops by EA expert and practitioners like Ian from Ability Engineering, host from Sparx Systems Central Europe, and few others in Sparx EA ecosystem. The first workshop is by Ian Mitchell from Ability Engineering, presenting at the topic, Putting EA at the Heart of Your Business. It's more than adding users, a special topic in EA. We will be muting all the participants throughout the session, and if any of you are having any questions during the session, please use the chat window or the Q&A window to drop your questions to the speaker. So the speaker can answer the questions during the session. To enable collaboration and communication with Ian and other EA practitioners directly after the session, we request you to visit the dedicated channel for the session in Microsoft Teams. Ian and several other speakers have kindly accepted to stay in the channel to have a one-to-one discussion and answer your questions. The link to the MS Teams channel is posted in the chat window for your quick reference. If anyone is having any difficulties in connecting to Teams, please reach us in the chat window or write to us at registrations@eaglobalsummit.com. It is registrations@eaglobalsummit.com. Thanks once again for your interest and support to EA Global Summit 2022. Looking forward to the wonderful session with Ian. Over to Ian now.
Thanks, Dewey. Good morning, everybody. Glad you could join us this morning. My name is Ian Mitchell. I've been a Sparx person for nearly 20 years, I think. So quite a long time. I have a number of clients in the UK and around the world. And what I'm going to try and do this morning is do a session exploring how Sparx can get better integrated with your business. So there's going to be lots of sessions today, later on, and tomorrow, which are kind of deep technicals, getting into the bits and bytes of Sparx. This is more about Sparx looking out into the rest of the business. Those of you, by the way, who can see me on the video, I do wave my arms around quite a lot, which is you may find distracting. Also, Dewey just said this is a workshop, and this is the first time I have to say I've ever done a 3-hour workshop entirely online. So you need to help me out here by sending in questions, because otherwise I'll just sit here and talk for 3 hours non-stop. Actually, I won't speak for 3 hours non-stop. I will do breaks, a couple of breaks of about 10 minutes as we go along. So please do send in those questions. We have someone, Jackie, is looking at your questions in Teams, and we'll kind of collate them together and try and pull together 2 or 3 similar questions. And then a little note will appear on the screen underneath my nose, and I'll try and answer the question as we go along. There'll be a Q&A session at the end, and also I'll be available on Teams afterwards. So, right, let's get into the session then. So this is a bit about me. This is what I looked like when I was younger. I've been doing this for getting on for 40 years in IT, which is depressing. And the products you see there are the things that I've developed over the years. Have to keep mentioning those because that's what pays the bills, I'm afraid. So you will get mentions of these, but I'm happy to declare an interest. The reason I'm here is to hopefully encourage you to buy some of those products. So let's all be honest with each other, shall we? So the session today, then, I'm going to hang it off. Well, it's got kind of 2 threads to it that I'm trying to weave together. The first is a story from a customer that I've had over the last 3 years. 3 years. Actually, it's 2 customers, but it makes it a better story just to pretend that it's just one. And it's their experience of growing their use of Enterprise Architect. So they started with nothing, did a little bit of an experiment, grew it a bit more. Then I got involved. They had a bit of a think. We changed the way they did things a bit, and then they grew it some more. So we're going to try and follow that journey along. And at the same time, I'm going to offer to you my way of thinking about that problem, because trying to look at everything that people do in the EA world is really complicated. There are things to import and export, and things to publish, and things to model, and changes, and all kinds of things to think about, and it can get a bit bewildering. So I'm going to offer to you as part of this session, I think, a fairly simple way of chopping the problem into sort of manageable pieces so that you can concentrate on one area, not to the exclusion of everything else, but hopefully to make the job a little more manageable, a little bit more human being sized. So this is what this customer did. They had a little bit of a go at doing some stuff in EA. I got involved at, if you can hopefully see my mouse, at this stage between the first steps and the more focused modeling bit. So they'd done some modeling, and I got involved when they were going, well, this doesn't seem to be working very well. Nobody cares about what we've done. So I helped them to focus down a bit more on delivering something useful. I then stayed involved with the team to then roll it out to a much wider audience. And so we're going to probably spend more time on the latter bit of scaling up the use of EA rather than just this first bit. But the first bit I think is interesting because it kind of introduces this way of thinking about how we might do EA stuff. So we're going to look across all of these sort of things. And my hope here is at the end of the session, you might think, oh, actually, the way I'm using EA, I should maybe concentrate on this bit rather than that bit. Okay, so that's the hope. So let's go into how they got started, how these guys got started. Hopefully, if any of you out there are current or former customers of mine, I hope you won't recognize yourselves because I have changed some of the details to protect the innocent. So this is where these guys started. They wanted to do some enterprise architecture. They'd heard about enterprise architecture, and their CTO said, enterprise architecture, I'd like some of that, please. So they started, they went on some Archimate training, which is the very popular way of doing enterprise architecture stuff, particularly in Europe at the moment. A good language for expressing all kinds of ideas. And they did some workshops, they pulled together bits of documents and spreadsheets and this and that, and they created some nice diagrams. These aren't the diagrams, obviously, I can't show their diagrams. And for those who are familiar with Archimate, it has this purple layer at the top, which is the kind of abstract ideas of where's the business going and what's life all about and what does it mean. And then there are business and application and technology layers underneath. So those are those different colors. I think I've got that right. Please, those who are Archimate experts, feel free to correct me. It won't do any good. I can never remember it all. But they were pretty happy with it. They felt that they were getting some pretty decent insights, and the problem was nobody else was. But before we get into the reaction of the rest of their business to what they'd done, it's worth remembering, and those of us I think who've been doing EA for a long time maybe forget this bit, that first step of going from using Visio and drawing some drawings and some spreadsheets to a modeling tool is a really big step. And I certainly, every time I come across this with new EA users, I have to kind of relearn that actually this isn't obvious. So those of you who are EA experts, we need to be a bit kind to those people who aren't, because this movement from I'm just drawing pictures to I'm drawing diagrams now, which have to have a standard kind of layout and way of doing things, is a big one. And people love their clip art and bits of icons and little pictures and things in Visio because that's what they've been brought up with for years and years and years. And people are really used to that idea of dumping their information in whatever form they feel like into a diagram, rather than saying, actually, no, now we're into the business of actually having a standard notation. Stuff has to be in the way that the language describes. So you just don't get to make up shapes of what your ideas are. So, and each one of those shapes actually means something. And it's not what you decide it means, it has a standard meaning. So this is a two-edged sword, of course. If I draw a little blue oval in EA, it means a use case. And everybody in the world who's ever heard of use cases knows what you mean. If you mean something different by use case, you're in trouble, because the next person that tries to read your model says, that little oval thing isn't a use case, it's a something else. So getting that discipline is a big step as well. So whilst you were drawing your little diagrams in Visio with your own bits of clip art, unless you were there to explain the diagram, nobody else understood it. But if you were there, you could go, hey, this is what I mean. Moving to that world where every diagram means something and it stands by itself is a big step. And I think probably the final massive step that we always underestimate is Visio. It's a pretty easy tool to use, isn't it? Bit of draggy, droppy, pointy, clicky stuff. Enterprise Architect is not simple. No way of getting around that. It's a big, complicated modeling tool for doing big, complicated models. So people getting used to that is fun. Every time I ever teach people how to use Enterprise Architect, I always learn something new. I did last week. I think Horst from Liebe taught me, I think it's Control and Tab to switch between, anyway, I digress. So this is how they got started. So they did their model, they produced some diagrams, it was all fine. They got the hang of Archimate and putting things on diagrams and having multiple diagrams and organizing the packages, and went back to their stakeholders, and particularly the CTO, who was kind of sponsoring what they were doing, and said, you know, look at this, isn't it fantastic? This wasn't exactly the CTO's reaction. I can't remember what it was that he asked for, but it was some kind of gobbledygook, strange diagram thing that he'd seen in some other tool. It probably wasn't the application portfolio strategy, evolution, roadmap strategy, prioritization diagram, but it was something like that, some kind of magical diagram that was going to show him how to run the organization's IT. And he didn't see it. What he saw was a bunch of Archimate diagrams. So that was a disappointment to him. We went to the stakeholders who'd given a little bit of the information to make this stuff up, and their reaction was similarly, what on earth is all this stuff? I have no idea what you're talking about. More importantly, this is one of the principal stakeholders, she was particularly concerned with, well, these guys had a project process, a very well-defined, structured process, how to deliver changes into the business. Say a kind of a feasibility stage and a kind of a review stage and a high-level design and all that kind of stuff. A very well-organized one. And her comment was, well, it doesn't fit. These are all these funny diagrams. Well, where does it fit into the project process? So without that, it wasn't really very interesting to her. So what I think, the reaction of the team was, well, oh, that was a bit of a surprise to everybody. So at this point, they said, well, what's caused this? Well, the first thing, by the way, I should say I've just reused this diagram because I like it a lot. I once drew it on a very long train journey. But what they did was they got lost in the tools. And those of you who are newish to EA will know you can wander around inside of EA all day and all night doing what you think is useful stuff, and it's not. So they had realized that in trying to make this change from Visio to EA and unstructured to structured and all that kind of stuff, they'd completely lost focus on, well, what is it that we're trying to deliver to the business here? What's our value? Yes, we've produced some kind of enterprise architecture. So what? So this is where I got involved at the stop and think stage. So the modeling team, this little yellow chap here, he wants to make his modeling simpler and easier. They'd used Archimate and it was kind of successful. You know, it was working. They were producing some stuff, but Archimate's awfully complicated. Those of you who've tried to learn the whole thing will rapidly figure out that nobody can model absolutely every single bit of Archimate. And I hope, those who know Archimate better than me may correct me, I hope the inventors of Archimate don't assume that everybody does everything, that we do get to choose, that we say, actually, these bits here are important to what I'm trying to do, but these bits over here, not. I know more, I guess, about the BPMN process modeling language, and certainly I never teach the whole language. I have to simplify it to make it easier to model. So this is what the modeling team had realized is, absolutely, they have to make this thing simpler to do because it's just taking too long to do stuff. The CTO, on the other hand, was still hanging out for, I want to know how to manage my business better, please. I need these kind of insights, these funky diagrams that tell him everything about everything. Failing that, and part of my job, I think, was to say, this isn't going to happen next week. There needs to be so much more information and so much more technology involved before we can give you insights. What we can try and do is deliver some value to other parts of your organization, even if it's not to you yourself. Stakeholders, on the other hand, she was all about concrete deliverables. Deliver me something that fits the process that I'm already following. Don't try and change the whole project process, please. It's just too hard. So please make sure that whatever you deliver fits that process. Her team were happy to help out with talking to the modelers, but they were not going to become Archimate geniuses. Absolutely no way. Just far too many other things to do. And at this point, we started talking about this initial deliverable, this idea of an architecture, I think it was called an architecture impact assessment, architecture impact document. So anyway, architecture impact. It just said, I'm thinking of making this change to the business, and as part of the process, partway through, it said, at this point, the architecture team shall produce an architecture impact document. And this is what we thought, oh, we could use our enterprise architecture to help us to produce that. At this point, we're starting to coalesce on there's a thing here that we can deliver that fits the process, that helps the stakeholders to move the project forward a bit faster, and will hopefully produce an architecture impact document that's better than the one we have at the moment, because it can consider now the whole of the technical architecture and the business architecture above it. So at this point, I introduced to them the idea, and this is the kind of framework. Oh, I hate framework. It's just a set of ideas. It's not a framework at all. It's some ways of thinking about what these people are trying to do, trying to tease it apart into, I think, 4 lumps. And I've used this technique kind of behind the scenes with clients for many years now. And it's good enough. It kind of works. It stops people from getting confused as to why they're doing what they're doing. And it tries to say, here are 4 different aspects to what you're doing when you're trying to grow your use of Enterprise Architect. There's probably more. There's probably some things I haven't thought about. If there are, then please tell me in the chat. But I've used this for quite a while, and it seems to work. So we're splitting it into 4 different things. They're all deliberately verbs because they're doing things. So I'm delivering, I'm engaging, I'm modeling, and I'm harvesting. So we'll keep coming back to them, but I'll give you the quick tour around what I mean by all the different bits. The idea, by the way, was I called model-driven delivery because you've got to give these things a name, and hopefully a 3-letter abbreviation. So MDD is what we call it internally. And it's model-driven delivery. And the key is in the last word. It's about delivering stuff. I still come across lots and lots of modeling teams who are doing great stuff, producing lovely little models that describe some aspect of their business. And you go, oh, great. Who's the consumer of that information? And there's a pause. Well, we've shown it to some people. Well, what did they say? Well, they didn't understand it. Oh, no. Okay, so you're not actually delivering anything at all. You're just having fun modeling. And I'm sure none of the people in this session are people who model for fun, but maybe you know somebody who is. So it's all about delivery. So delivery is the activity that says concentrate on what do you need to produce, and it's got to be a concrete thing. Well, we'll talk about it later. Some concrete, some slightly runny concrete. What do you need to produce, and who do you produce it for? What's actually in those deliverables? So it's not just it's a document. Well, it's a document. What's in the document? So what's the content of it? And then a third aspect of that is what's the mechanism of delivering it? So trying to tease apart here the what and the who from the what's inside it, but only latterly the mechanics for delivering it. And you've got to do all 3. You can't just do one. So that's then giving us a focus to say, this is what we're all here for. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to produce something for somebody to actually accomplish some business goal. The engage part of the process is often forgotten. It's we're not going to sit in a dark room and model all this stuff. We're going to go out into our businesses and talk to them and encourage them to give their knowledge to us. And that process of engaging with these people may be quite separate from the delivery. The delivery may say it's a document. The engagement may be a workshop which then feeds back some notes to them or feeds back a little diagram or a spreadsheet or a draft document. But that process of engagement is going to be complicated because this is where we have to go back to them in ways that they understand. So not showing them some fantastically intricate Archimate diagram, but showing them something that they can relate to. So there's a skill there, quite different to the delivery skill. Part of what we may have to deliver may involve us using information that we don't actually have and that we shouldn't really be modeling ourselves. So we'll show some examples later on from this project of excuse me, of things that needed to be in the model because the delivery said so, but we didn't have. So we're going to have to harvest some of that data from elsewhere. I'm sure most of you know lots and lots of different funky EA techniques for harvesting information, and we're not going to go through every single one of them, but just through at a kind of business level. Well, why do I care about this? What's the risks of doing this harvesting? Am I pulling in information that's actually not mine? It's mastered somewhere else. And what are the issues going to be around doing that? And finally, the bit that you already think you know how to do, which is modeling. Yay, we go and model, we draw diagrams and we create things and we add tag values and we do meta models and stuff like that. So this bit maybe is more familiar to you, but I think I'm going to try and go at it in maybe a way you haven't seen before. And it's about giving this stakeholder, this modeling team, what they wanted, which is quickly and simply, please. I don't want to be modeling this forever. Disappointing, I have to say, that 20 years of experience of EA comes down to 4 boxes, but hey ho, that's just the way it is. The boxes interact with each other. I was going to do a nice build on that. I've got some nice ones later on, but this is an idea of how the boxes interact, because clearly they do. So if I'm thinking over here about delivery, then I'm thinking about what the content of my delivery has to be. Oh, I need lists of requirements with their stakeholders, and then the requirements need priorities. So I'm beginning to populate a meta model, which I'm going to use when I do my modeling. I'm also, when I'm thinking about my delivery, about who I'm going to deliver it to, that's giving me ideas about how I'm going to do my engagement, because that kind of user isn't going to react well to a big complex diagram. Maybe they just want a list of something in a spreadsheet or a collaborate dashboard. Maybe that's the way to get to those people. And similarly, when I'm thinking about the model and how it's going to populate my deliverables, there's a need there for some external data which will inform my harvesting. And for symmetry purposes, I had to try and think of a way of linking engage and harvest. And I think there is, because in the past, I've done a bit of harvesting of data to populate models, not really because it's strictly part of the delivery, but just to have some data in there that when I go out to stakeholders and try and engage with them, they see stuff that they know. They see some familiar data. So one time we pulled in some past project information, and that worked quite well. Oh, look, this old projects that I used to work on, and the people we were engaging with, I think, trusted the model a bit more, because it wasn't just brand new crazy stuff in here. There was stuff that they knew to be true. So there's an element of trust in there. So I think there really is a link between those two, but maybe not as obvious as you might think. So I hope you're putting questions onto the chat, because sitting here talking to this little green dot in the middle of my camera, frankly, is weird. Oh, by the way, only do that if you're watching this real time. If you're watching it on YouTube afterwards, I'm not going to be there. So those of you who've got up early this morning. Oh, particularly anybody, by the way, who's got up early in the UK. It's still 7:30 in the morning in the UK. So if you've got up to watch me from the UK, please send me a little note and I'll give you a shout out, and thank you for being here. So I'm not going to go through all these in sequence. I'm going to dip backwards and forwards into the project occasionally, but I will start by thinking about the delivery part. Because if you get this wrong, nothing else will go right. It will be a waste of time. Because modeling is not just fun, it's got to have a purpose. And it sounds so obvious, I almost feel embarrassed to say so, but I just cannot count over the last 20 years the number of places I've been to that have just got completely lost in the modeling and have completely lost focus on what they're trying to deliver and for whom. So don't make that mistake, please. It's got to have a purpose. So we'll look at some of the challenges then of how to do this, think about delivery first before we go anywhere near modeling and anything else. So talking to the team on this project, they were kind of frustrated because they decided that, okay, we'll go out and ask people what they want, but nobody knows what they want. So how are you supposed to deliver anything? Well, the reason they don't know what they want is they've never experienced this idea of putting all this business knowledge into one model and being able to look at it and slice it and dice it from different angles, which as EA users, we know is an incredibly powerful thing to be able to do. But they couldn't kind of articulate, well, I want one of those or one of these. And even if they did, they were finding that you deliver something and they go, oh, well, no, I don't want that. I want this. You show me one of those. But now I look at it, I want one of these. So that, well, they keep changing their mind all the time. And there's always more information that's needed. And this is particularly true at the sort of fuzzier end of the deliverables, where it's insights and ideas and opportunities and stuff. There's always opportunities for more data. Any of you who've worked on a data warehouse project will know this is just how data warehouse projects are. No matter what report you put in front of your users, they'll always want a bit more data and to drill into that a bit more or to summarize it. And that's just how it is. And if you worked on data warehouses, you're not surprised when that happens. Kind of what we're doing here in Enterprise Architect is often a knowledge warehouse of business knowledge. So of course, there's never any end to what people want to put into it. So don't be surprised. So my encouragement to them and their realization eventually was, this isn't a we define a deliverable, deliver it, end of. It's a process. We deliver something, they go, oh, that was great. Let's have some more of that. Now I need one of these. Okay, I'll deliver that. Oh, that was good too, but not quite as good as this. So can you change it? And we go back. So the process of delivering it is continuous. And that's good. Keeps us all in work, keeps us doing useful stuff. So let's look at what these guys tried to deliver. It was this architecture impact thing. It was fairly easy to define what was in it. So that was the good part. And that's the good thing about documents that you have to deliver. You can usually get a copy of an old one and go, aha, it's got this in it, it's got that, it's got a list of these, it's got some funny chatty bits about something else, it's got a funny diagram, but at least you've got a concrete example to go on. We'll look later on at areas where that reason isn't really true. And all this document was doing was saying, if I make this change in the business that I'm proposing, here's its effect on the architecture, because they were trying to drive the architecture in a particular direction to go mostly cloud-based and off-site, multi-site use, and that kind of stuff. So this was good. This was good. The CTO said, well, okay, you're not. Oh, I've got those ticks and crosses in the wrong order. I've just noticed that. It wasn't giving him his deep insights, but it was showing progress. So in your mind, reverse those two round. The stakeholder community were good. They were saying, right, finally, with my architecture impact, you're giving me something concrete which fits in my process, so I don't have to go and change my world. Okay, so now time to dive into this architecture impact thing and figure out how what is it we want to deliver and how. So So I'll split this into 3 bits then. The what, the how, and the where. So what do they need? What's inside it? What are the individual sort of moving parts and bits and pieces? How we can deliver it, the mechanism, and where in the model I'm going to find it, or where I'm going to have to go and harvest it from the outside. So the top bit is kind of the easy bit in any if you're analyzing a document, because it just says, hey, you get the document, you take it apart, and then you figure out that this is a list of those, and you can show how this relates to that. It's actually pretty straight. It's just data modeling. And those of you who are very old will remember being given a paper form and analyzing that form by going, oh, well, that's a customer, and then that's an address. An address is different from a customer, and then they had a telephone number and an account number, and you took all that information from that form and you made it into a data model. I was about to say, hands up those who have done that, but you're all out there. So that's a pretty well understood process. It's data modeling, and lots of people know how to do it. And we'll come back to that in a second when we look at modeling. I'm keeping my eye on the time because I want to give you a break after about 40 or 50 minutes or so. So I'm sure Jackie will remind me. So that part, if it's a document that you have to deliver, actually isn't so bad. It's a well-bounded, well-understood problem. You take the document apart and make a data model out of it, and that says, hey, that's what my model needs to contain. Life is not like that, I'm afraid. There is a spectrum of deliverables, from the solid, definite ones at the left-hand side here to the really fuzzy ones at the right-hand side. It just so happened in this case that we picked something for at this end, the definite document stuff, which is good because it's easy to define. Often needs an awful lot of data to make it work. So we were a bit shocked when we looked at our architecture impact document, just how much information needed to go into it. When you looked at each individual heading and each individual column in a table, that was a lot of information. But hey ho, that's the job. May have lots of consumers of that. The outputs, though, at least are simpler. You produce the document, you compare the document you've got out of Enterprise Architect with the document you had before and go, yeah, they're the same. And therefore, I think if you can pick these early on, as these guys did, the risk is lower. There's a really good chance that if you put the right information into the model, you generate a document that looks half decent, that will be acceptable. So you have a pretty low risk way of doing things. At the other end of this scale is the fuzzy priority, opportunity, kind of what should I do next? What does the world look like stuff, which was what the CTO was expecting, and why he was a bit frustrated as to that actually we started down this end where I thought we could have had much better chance of being successful. So he wanted this fuzzy stuff up here. And the problem with that fuzzy stuff is it is hugely open-ended. It's very, very difficult to define. Lots and lots of data, just like the other stuff, relatively few consumers. I'm not sure that's a benefit or a drawback, but they don't know what they want. And they certainly don't know how they want it delivered. Is it a pie chart? Is it some kind of heat map? Is it one of those fantastic charts that Prolaborate draws? They don't know. They might know it when they see it, but they certainly won't be able to tell you what it is in advance. So that makes these things really hard to nail down. But I would suggest the business value of this is probably way higher than an individual document that's produced at the other end of the scale. Because here you are going back to very senior people and saying, look, this model thing that we've been doing, it can tell you which bits of your application portfolio should be retired, which bits are best left where they are, and which bits you can put into the cloud, and start understanding risk and project dependencies and things like this. So really high value stuff, if only you can get the data and the knowledge into the model that lets you deliver them. So difficult to know where to start. I would say if it was me, and much as my advice to this team was start down this end and be successful. There's a great presentation that Peter Lieber does from Lieber in Austria, where he looks at how to be successful in EA, and it absolutely backs this up, or I back up what Peter says, which is do a little bit and be successful. Don't try and do everything, because if you fail, that says that doing enterprise architecture is clearly bad, which it isn't. It just means we didn't execute very well. So do a bit, be successful, do a bit more, be more successful, and so on. And eventually you'll begin to be able to deliver this sort of insight stuff as you're going along. And your user community for this will be very frustrated because it won't all arrive together. But that's just how it is. You know, that's nothing really we can do about that. So I don't know if any questions are coming in. Come on, ask me some questions, otherwise I'm sitting here all by myself. Delivery. So that's thinking about the kind of thing we're trying to deliver. Now let's think about how to deliver it. And I'm sure this bit is going to be familiar to more of you. There's a whole, again, a range of different options that we might think about. Far left-hand side over here, which people still try every now and then, and the results are pretty much uniformly the same. It's, we've got this great tool and it's got lots of great information in it, so I'll just get you get it installed on your desktop and you can have access to it. And the new user opens it up and goes, what on earth is all this? Diagrams and packages and bits, what am I looking at? And they might look at it for 5 minutes and go, too hard, much too hard. There's a variation of that we'll come into a bit later on, because it may be that you want to make these people into modelers. That's why you're giving them access. And if you do that, there are some tricks we can look at in a second that says, don't just give them the model and run away. Be nice, be kind to them and give them some ways of getting into the model and understanding it and exploring in a more structured way. So if you do want to pull them into your modeling world, there are some ways that we can think of to do that. But usually, for the majority of stakeholders who will never be modelers, it is a bad idea just to give them model access. What they probably want is at the other end of the scale. They want this funky stuff that Collaborate does for them. And it's ever since Collaborate's been invented, which is not that many years ago now, you show these kind of diagrams to people and say, this has all come out of Enterprise Architect. The statement is always, I didn't know Enterprise Architect could do that. And the answer is, well, it doesn't. It's Collaborate pulling things out of Enterprise Architect and changing it and molding it and filtering it and sorting it and delivering it to you in a way you can get your head around. That's what Collaborate's doing. That's the magic of what they're doing. And most clients I see looking at Collaborate go, that's what I meant. That's what I wanted. I didn't want those funky Archimate diagrams or UML diagrams. I don't know what all that's about. I want that stuff. I want these big diagrams that give me ideas about what's happening in my business. So that's where most people want to be. Sorry, I've just got a question come in here, which I'll just read. Based on your experience, do you think delivering valuable model is easier in a business domain than technical? Ooh. So the question says, based on your experience, do you think delivering valuable model is easier in a business domain for management than a technical one? I don't know. I don't think I do really. I wouldn't differentiate between a business deliverable and a technical one. Most of the stuff you do in Enterprise Architect that we're talking about here is in a business kind of world, not a techie one. Business people I've generally found to be a bit more understanding than techie people who think they know better. So I would generally go for a business deliverable, partly because it's easier and partly because it adds more value very often. So I don't know if that answers the question. If not, come back to me later on. So back to delivery then. So we've decided what kind of thing we're trying to deliver, and it may be definite, even if it's a definite document today, Collaborate may still be the answer as how to deliver it. It may be a spreadsheet or a Word document still. Benefit of that is this is what they normally get. Because Collaborate, fantastic as it is, may be a bit of a change for some people. Like, oh, I normally get a spreadsheet with all the requirements in it, and now you're giving me some kind of funky view like this, which may be objectively better, but it's not what I was expecting. So if you want to have an easy life in terms of fitting in better with what else your business is doing, it may be better to start off with by saying, hey, look, you used to get a spreadsheet, I'll give you a spreadsheet. Okay, the spreadsheets come out of Enterprise Architect, but I'll just to make life easier. If they say, by the way, they want things in PowerPoint and Visio, don't talk to them anymore because they're obviously bad people. So just say, yeah, you can have access to a model because that's just better. But Word and Excel, yeah, okay, it's a pain, but there are lots of ways of giving them good documentation out of your model in that format to give them the interaction and the delivery that they need. You can either use the native functions in EA, which will produce you both Word and Excel. There's the Office integration add-in, which does a bit more stuff. And then there's EA Docs, obviously declaring an interest. I'm the author of EA Docs, which does all of it much, much better. But I would say that, wouldn't I? But don't let the tooling get in the way too much. Concentrate on, if you want an Excel and a Word document, right, okay, what does that need to contain? What are the fields? And then go and choose a tool that delivers that. Don't put the tool in ahead of the deliverable. Kind of an option that's kind of not on this scale somewhere, so I kind of put it somewhere else, is they may want it delivering to some other format. So a Jira or Confluence or a SharePoint or lots of other tools. And the answer there may be to say, we'll actually use Collaborate in between your Sparx model and those tools and sort of move it through Collaborate to do that, because Collaborate's got all these kind of funky interfaces that let you talk to all these different web-based tools. Because once you've got out of the desktop, 1990s kind of world of Sparx into the web world of Collaborate, then talking to these tools is much, much easier. So that may be another delivery mechanism you might think of, that rather than saying, here's a spreadsheet in a document, here's the same information delivered to a web, more web kind of tool. So what are we going to do then in this delivery stage? And this is, as I said before, highly iterative. Do a bit, deliver a bit, think a bit. So I would suggest that you start with, figure out what the delivery needs to look like. It's a document, it's got the following bits and pieces in it. Fantastic. Go away and invent some content that looks like that. Even if it's just dragged and dropped out of the project browser called requirement 1, use case 1, business function 1, don't even bother giving them a name. Don't even try and do the modeling. Get that some rubbishy content, but in the right structure with the right tagged values and the right connectors, and then try and create that deliverable. Try and export the spreadsheet. Try and create the document. Try and, if you are at that stage, send it to Collaborate and say, oh, that wasn't quite what I thought. So the user population will tell you, the consumers rather, will tell you what it is that they need. So get that feedback. And don't be surprised if that first feedback is bad. That means you're doing a good thing. This is completely, seems crazy, but it's true. The worst feedback you ever get is none. That says you're probably wasting your time and they don't know what you're talking about. The best feedback is where they go, ah, yeah, you've got this totally wrong. You should have done it like this. In which case, get your pen out and write it down and go round again. Yeah, I've got examples going back 20 years of organizations where their first feedback was bad and they got all gloomy and despondent and we're not doing it very well. Well, they were. They just didn't get it right first time. Fantastic. Go around again and again and again until eventually you're absolutely certain as to what the information is in your model when you start to put the real content in, and you know right away As soon as you've got the first proper set of requirements or the first proper set of business functions, you can immediately create an output document or a spreadsheet or a Collaborate dashboard that shows that data on day one. Yeah. The big mistake here is to say, no, we'll get the delivery and we'll create the content and then we'll get some more and then we'll create some more content and we'll go back and forth over here. And then at the very end of the project, we'll say, right, it's delivery time on Tuesday. Let's produce the document, or let's put Collaborate on top and pull the information out and see if it's okay. It's too late. Your model's already gone wrong. You've gone off in one direction from what your consumers want in a different direction, and it's all too late. So even if your first Collaborate dashboard or your first document or spreadsheet just has requirement number 1, requirement number 2, talks to stakeholder A with priority 1, doesn't matter. At least you've proven you can model stuff and deliver it. Yeah, it's a bit like, trying to launch a rocket to say, well, we'll concentrate completely on the capsule at the top and forget the rocket underneath it and make a capsule that's just all wrong, that can't ever be put into space. I mean, it would just be mad. You'd think those people were idiots. People do it all the time in the EA world. They get so lost in the modeling bit, they forget to create the deliverable as they're going along. Because apart from anything else, your users will look at those deliverables and go, okay, well, it's not quite what I was expecting because all the requirements are called requirement number 1 and 2. But at least it looks nice. Good. And we have a mechanism where we can press the button and do it. We're getting towards, I think, having break time, aren't we?
We've got 5 questions. I suggest you ask them all at the end.
Right. We've got some questions coming in. So thank you very much for asking your questions. I will take these after the end of the break because we're getting close. I'm just looking at where we are in the plan. Probably tell I haven't done this before. So yeah, we are pretty near to a break. So that's all good. So tools and techniques, Collaborate. I'm a huge fan. Been a fan since the first time I ever saw it. Just sitting on a beach in Goa, I think we were the first for. So it's fantastic. The big drawback, and there is one, sorry Collaborate team, it needs web servers and repository access and single sign-on and firewall changes and all that stuff. So from a technology point of view, it's painful, but it's worth the pain. You're going to have to do this at some point, because if you want to give your consumers this kind of information, there is only one way to do it, and that's in Collaborate. The alternative, by the way, is rather than you do all that stuff, get somebody else to do it. So do a Sparx in the cloud, put all the Collaborate stuff in the cloud, and let the Sparx India team do it, which is how I do it, because they're smarter than me at doing this stuff. So that's the only drawback of Collaborate. There is more work to do, though, to make it work. You do have to think what goes into those dashboards and what's the best way of doing it, and does it look nice, and tailor the dashboards to the individual types of users. So it's not no work. You don't plug it in and yay, it's all fantastic. But it's the same thought process you did when you create a document, which is who's going to read it, what detail do they need. So it's all the same stuff. But Collaborate's brilliant at doing things like hiding the complexity in your model and only showing each group of consumers what they need to see, just like you'd do if you were designing a document. And you probably want to put more diagrams in there, which only Collaborate will use. But hey, it's a fantastic story. Do it. If you're not doing it, you're missing out. So this is my kind of summary. Before we set just one more slide then before the break on what my project actually did. So understand what the tools can do. Understand what you need to make Collaborate work, what you need to generate documents and spreadsheets. Keep it simple. I would strongly advise you don't try and change your project process to fit your tools. You should be fitting into the process already there. Once you can deliver good and interesting stuff, then think about changing the process. But you'll be doing that with the business encouraging you to do that. And if we have time later on, I'll talk about don't change the model to suit one customer. It's a universal one. So what did we decide to do? We made an architecture impact document. We had to do a bucket load more modeling. because that was the kind of shape of the model that the team had produced to start with. So lots and lots of the purple layer stuff and not much further down. What was actually needed was a lot more in the that's the business layer, a load more in the application layer, and lower layers as well. So it was actually a lot more complicated than we thought, but doable. It was done. A lot of technical information was needed that we just didn't have and didn't master, so we had to go back and harvest some of that information, and we'll talk about harvesting in a second. And it was fine, really. That worked pretty well. We could create a document for every project. We all had it all in one model, and we were then beginning at this point to populate this model with stuff that the CTO was going to be interested in. As each project came along, it added more and more detail, and we were pulling more and more detail in, and gradually it became more useful. So that's where we're going to go next. We're going to look at now, we've figured out what we're going to deliver, we've figured out how we're going to deliver it. I'm next going to look at engaging and modeling in more detail, and I will take some questions, but it's now 7:51 in the UK. I will start at 2 minutes past 8 UK time, so in 10 minutes time. So I will shut off my audio and video, and I will return in 10 minutes, and I will take some questions then. See you shortly. Right. Well, hopefully you've all been and got yourself a cup of coffee. Mine is on the way, so I'll give it another minute or two once my coffee arrives, and then we can start again. Thanks for all the questions, by the way. They are coming through quite nicely. I'm just reading them. Do the statement on the DWH project. Okay. Somebody here's Bob saying he uses WebEA, easier to set up than Collaborate. Yeah. Yeah. A bit like a bicycle is easier to set up than a Land Rover. Give me the Land Rover any day. Bicycles all very well, but sorry, WebEA to me looks like a toy or a test harness for a web interface. Collaborate's the proper thing. Johan wants to know top 3 to 5 books. I haven't written it yet. There are lots of good, well, a handful of good books on the individual modeling topics, but they're not EA specific. But and I think, didn't the guys in Austria write a German language book about EA, a really thick one? Because I were in their office the other day and I saw it. I don't know if that's kept up to date. Maybe somebody from Sparx Systems Central Europe or Liba can tell me what the status of that book is. I don't know whether it's updated, but I really don't think there's much. I mean, this is why the Collaborate Sparx Systems India team, Sixth Force, run these events for us, because this is where we find out what's going on. There was a really good question here about value versus time. So Roger's saying, challenge value versus time. The more time you spend gathering data and building a rich model, the higher the value. I agree with that. Yeah, so I agree with the premise that, and this is why I've suggested to this client and to all others, that says, do a little bit, the minimum, there should be an idea of minimum viable model. What's the least bit of modeling that you can do, the least time and money you can spend to deliver something useful, and no more. Repeat. And okay, you may be a very long time getting to that big, funky, sexy model that delivers fantastic insights, but at least all the way along, you'll be delivering something useful. So maybe we should introduce, there you go, you heard it here first, the minimum viable model. There you go, something new for this morning. Somebody here wants me to talk about ISO 42010 and some other ISOs, none of which I have ever heard of. So sorry about that, Johan, I have no idea. Can I compare UAF with Archimate? Another easy answer, no. No, I started out in this world doing UML stuff when UML hadn't really even been published. So things like Archimate and new dark magic to me. Herman says, we have a discussion about using UML as a language to model. Do you think this skill is absolutely necessary to do modeling by practitioners? Yes. If you don't know UML, you're absolutely stuffed. There's no way you can use Archimate and stuff. I think if you haven't got that basis of UML, because all these MLs are all based on top of UML. UML has the basic ideas, but I would say that because I'm a UML guy from 20 years ago, so what do I know about it? So Jackie's still fielding questions, and oh, Takeshi's asked a question. Hello, Takeshi. From Japan. Videos both EA and Collaborate from the beginning only, and EA for when to introduce Collaborate. Good question. Experience suggests that Collaborate's really only useful if you've got lots of data, but most organizations take forever to implement it. So start them both together would be my advice now. Even though by some miracle Collaborate arrives within a week, your IT department can set it up in a week, you've got nothing to look at. Fine. I'd rather that than we finish, we've got a model that looks really good, we want to put it into Collaborate, and then we have to wait 6 months while the IT department figure out how to do it. So I would actually start the two running together on the basis that I'm going to have to deliver a whole load of stuff first before the Collaborate guys have the IT department have implemented Collaborate. But a better solution to all of these is put it all in the cloud, make it somebody else's problem, and then you can have Collaborate in 24 hours. That's the way forward.
Two questions you didn't answer.
Two questions I didn't answer, apparently.
One about native Excel.
Oh yes, Excel. Yes, I was. There's a slide further back about native EA export for deliverables. Yes, I was talking about the CSV export, which is a bit of a toy. The Office MDG is a lot more sophisticated, and the ADocs with Excel is even more sophisticated still. So there's a whole range, and I think other people have produced Excel exporters as well. So lots of choices to do there.
And then there's asynchronous responses.
Oh, the async, yeah. Somebody asked a question. Daniel asked a question about async interaction. We'll come to that in a second. Coming soon. Right. Let's move on because we have lots of things to do. So where we've got to with this client now is they've produced some architecture impact documents. It's going okay. CTO is now leaning on them saying, right, come on, I want more stuff per project, and I want to see progress towards delivering my stuff, my kind of funky insight, what the heck do I do next stuff. So it's time to get big. Just notice this. When you do a little PowerPoint scale up like that, you lose focus. Now, there's a thought, isn't it? As you scale up, you lose focus. No, just a thought for the day. So this is where we got to at the, probably this is 6 months after I first talked to these guys. So I went back and said, it's going fine. We're delivering stuff. The business are now beginning to get the idea of what we're talking about, this model thing. People are starting to show an interest. Right, we have a bunch of new groups who think that they want to put their stuff into Enterprise Architect. And this is not uncommon, by the way. You go from zero to hero, and suddenly everybody wants to put their stuff in Enterprise Architect, and you're going, whoa, just a minute. There's a finite amount of resource and talent here to help you to do this. We can't do all these things. So their highlights were these three. They were a financial institution, so the risk management was a big thing. So they had a whole, what they called their risk management framework, which was a whole load of ideas that modeled ideas of financial risk. So very, very specialist. So nothing to do with the risk management stuff you see in EA, are very, very specialist industry specific things. Processes, BPMN, dead easy, requirements management, we all understand. So we sit down with them, as we do, and we say, what do you need to deliver from each of those? So now the team are getting the hang of this. They're getting used to the idea of, okay, risk management, what do you mean? Risk management guy said, it's documents. There are some, they were kind of not legal, they were kind of industry, government compliance documents. It says you must produce a risk management document according to this standard, and it must look like this. Okay, understood. Process mapping, they said, well, all our processes are on the intranet. Because it's easier to ignore them if they're on the internet. intranet than it is to ignore them if they're in a document, because that's what people do with processors. They just ignore them. Requirements management, again, old-fashioned. We need a requirements management document, please. Okay, so that's what you said you wanted. How are we going to actually engage with you guys to figure out what risk management process and requirements are all about? How do we interact with you before we produce those deliverables? Because those two different ways of doing it may not be the way we actually want to interact with you to make something happen. How can I get you, the process people, to understand what we're modeling and contribute to it in order that we produce the deliverables? So that's why I'm differentiating between the deliver bit, which is here's the thing you wanted, and the bit that went before that in time that said, how do I interact with you to produce that knowledge? So now we're going to look at this whole kind of engage stage. Excuse me, you've had time to drink your coffee and I haven't. So it's delivering that business value by engaging your organization. And this is about them, not about you. This is about you taking your clever knowledge that you need and that you've already developed and reaching out to them, not teaching them how to read Archimate, which may not work so well. So here we go. We've got some Archimate diagrams. Nobody understands what it means. How do we move forward and engage with them? So these are some of the things that I think are items on our agenda here. I want it to be immediate. I don't really want to have to, every single time I draw a diagram, to have to then move it into Visio, change all the little boxes and lines to look like little Visio bits of clip art, and then show it to the user population. That's not great. Well, however I engage with them, they have to find it easy to understand. And I'm prepared to do a little bit of training maybe for them, but it may have to be simplified. So I may have a great idea of how I'd like to do the modeling, but I may have to simplify it in order to get them to engage. An example of this I know from teaching BPMN process modeling to people is BPMN is a huge language. It's got all kinds of crazy stuff because it's a superset of every process you might ever want to think about. But for an individual organization, I pick a subset about 20% of the size of the language. So I only allow, I think, 7 different kinds of event out of a possible 120. So keep it easy to understand and they've got a chance. Process modeling, strangely, is one of those easiest ones because BPMN has flowcharts and process modelers want flowcharts, so it's pretty easy. Architecture, pretty hard, pretty difficult. Most important probably though, is I want to make it easy to collaborate and to contribute. So I want it to be easy for people to say, you've done that wrong. I'll just change that for you. So you want that collaboration to work. And I want to see what other people see what other people have done. So because people's expectations here, I think, are sky high because they've got all the social media tools that let them like and comment and post their own ideas and stuff. And well, that's the world we need to be in, even if they're not EA users. So let's just go through some of these engagement techniques and see which ones we should be using and where. And then at the end of that, we'll look at how my team here actually went about it. Talked a bit before about, hey, here's access to EA, everything's fine. Probably isn't, unless you want to make them into modelers, in which case the next slide applies. So this is usually not the right answer. But it's worth occasionally just showing them selected diagrams just to try and pull them into your world and going, hey, if you just learned a bit more about modeling, maybe you could do this for yourselves. And you'll find a few people will kind of, I've never really liked Visio. I like something a bit more structured. So pull them into our world. For those kinds of people, and for basically anybody else who's looking at your model, these kinds of things, and I've just pulled this one out from the EA example model, these kind of signposty diagrams are incredibly important. They look a bit, Mickey Mouse and crikey, they're a bit of a pain to do, but they're absolutely vital because apart from anything else, visually, they're starting to look quite good. When they put them into Collaborate, they look even better, or Web EA if you must. And it helps people to find things in the model, because EA is a bit of a big flat bucket of stuff. If you start putting these signposting and navigation views in there, it goes, oh yeah, well, I want to go and find about the requirements model. I'll just click on that and see what happens. And hey ho, when you click on it, you get another diagram, and then you click on another diagram, and eventually you might get down to the actual individual bits of data that you want to find. So this is us building our own navigation structure on top of EA, and it's absolutely vital if you want people to engage with it. Another one which I advised the customer about only the other week was putting keys on diagrams. Now you think EA doesn't really let you do that very well. You've got a toolbox, but not a key, because that key, remember, is, if it's in the diagram, is going to appear in a Collaborate diagram, and it's also going to appear whenever it's published in a document. So don't assume that everybody knows that that's an application event and that's a component, but that's an interface, because I can never remember what they are. So don't be afraid to do simple stuff like putting keys on diagrams, because the lay user who doesn't have the benefit of you standing over their shoulder goes, oh, okay, so that's an event, and I kind of got an idea of what a component would be and an interface, and they can begin to read these diagrams themselves without you being there. So you're delivering training, if you like, to the reader right at the point they read the diagram. Simple stuff, but definitely worth doing. And remember, Collaborate readers can see this stuff as well. So it's not just people who are EA users, it's anytime you want to publish that because the getting started thing here is a diagram, it can be put into Collaborate, it can form part of Collaborate's navigation as well. So you're getting it, two things for free. While we're talking about that, then Collaborate would be my engagement tool of choice. And I speak as one who produces something that's an alternative to it, which is EA Docs, producing documents. I would still say Collaborate should be my first choice, and only if that either isn't available, or you can't get it to run in your infrastructure. Okay, back off to using just a minute, I'm getting questions coming, which is very distracting. I can't feel that now. So most of your engaging users you're trying to engage with are probably expecting something a bit like Collaborate. Something web-based for a start, colorful, tailored to me, doesn't include stuff that I don't understand, hides things I don't need to see, and is presented to me in a way that makes some kind of sense. So that's probably what your users are expecting. A large number of them, not necessarily everybody, but I would say a good number. If you do use it, there is work to do. So you're going to have to hide stuff they don't need to see. You're going to have to produce these Collaborate dashboards. Again, that's what people expect to see. It's something like this sort of diagrams up here with lots of groovy stuff on it, curated to me as a stakeholder, me as an individual, but as a group. So in our case, we had a dashboard for the process owners, and it had lists of the processors and lists of this and diagrams and all what they would expect. So it's a really, really friendly way of getting at EA information. I think I mentioned before, the technology is a full-on web implementation with all the web implementation adventures. And in a world where most people are going to cloud-based IT, then you'd be brave, I think, to not put it in the cloud, or at least explore that first. So talk to us or one of the other cloud providers that says, Collaborate in the cloud and save yourself an awful lot of work. Yeah, it's only money, isn't it? But it's about delivering it quickly. So that's the Collaborate story. I mean, there's probably I think Nizam is doing a session on Collaborate later on today, I think. So feel free to ask him all of your Collaborate questions, and not me. Old school stuff is still relevant. There's a large part of the planet who still work off of spreadsheets. So if they want a spreadsheet, give them a spreadsheet. You can, as I said in the delivery section, you can export a little CSV from EA pretty easily with native function. You can export it with Office MDG and make it a bit cleverer. You can export it with, and I think in that one, you can then pull it back in again as well. So perfectly possible, given that what we're all about here is engaging rather than delivering, is send them a spreadsheet, let them edit some stuff, get the spreadsheet back, review it, put it back into EA. And things like EA Docs XL will let you compare the spreadsheet that comes back with what's in EA already and go, look at where all the changes are going to happen and say, yep, those are all sensible. Just dump them straight back into EA. So you can make that interaction quite quick. But spreadsheet people are spreadsheet people. You'll might struggle to talk them out of it. Once they've seen that you can do it in a spreadsheet, I find there may be more in a listening place to say, could you do this for me in a different way? Actually, I could. Same group of people really are document people. Yeah, they shouldn't be in a web world. They shouldn't be document people anymore. But there's whole industries that work entirely off of documents, which is why EA Docs has been selling for the last 10 years and more. So in this case, it's not the deliverable document, remember, it's the work in progress document. And given that it's pretty easy to just hit the button and say generate and send it, that's pretty good. The downside with using documents as a kind of a work in progress engagement mechanism is the comments that you get back. Because this is your normal way of doing things is I start with my model, I run it through EA Docs or document generator of your choice. I produce a Word document. I send multiple copies to multiple people. That's fine. They produce all of do track changes because they're not stupid. They know about track changes. They put that on and they put their comments and they change things and they strike things out and delete things and add things. And then you get back N documents, which you then have to, I don't know really, you have to go through one at a time and check that the change that this user made to that document isn't the same as that user made to the same document in the same place, but they contradict each other. Because this person asked for a red one and this one asked for a blue one, and it's a moment it's green, so I don't know what to do. So this bit is entirely painful. And those of you who've spent evenings and weekends with a bunch of review documents doing this know this is just awful. Yes, you can produce the documents in quantity. It's when they come back. And because this is why we're producing it. We're producing it to get engagement. We're producing it so that we can get back all of these comments and put them into our model and take account of them. And yet that's the most horrible bit. So a little while ago, we had and the EA Docs team had to think about this and came up with a different solution. So this solution says, first of all, you don't need to produce the same document for everybody, because one of the things we know about using models and generating documents from those models is not everybody has to have the same document. You can have multiple documents, different types of document for different kinds of people, all drawn from the same content. This is where EA Docs came from 15 years ago, was exactly that use case. So we can send those documents, either the same ones or variations, to our reviewers, and we can get their comments on them using Word track changes, and then feed them back into this thing called Revision Manager, which is a bit of EA Docs we developed a year or two ago at the beginning of lockdown. There's videos of this on the internet, on YouTube or on eadocs.com. The gist here is, here's a list of the documents that I got back. Some of them reviewed by one person, some of them reviewed by multiple people, because they could have put it onto Office 365 and done a simultaneous edit of the document in real time. Cool stuff. And I can select, and what the Revision Manager does is it parses the document, pulls out the comments and the changes, deletions, additions, and says, I know which EA thing that referred to. Because way back in the process, back at this stage, when EA Docs generated the document, it invisibly tagged the documents with lots and lots of GUIDs, because we all know what GUIDs and things are, GUIDs and field names and tag value names, and said, this bit of data here isn't just a random string of text. It is the name field of this particular requirement, or this use case, or this business function. So by the time it comes all the way back through Word and back out here again, we can find out where all the changes were and work out that actually from all these documents that we got sent, these are the changes. And we do it by the thing in EA rather than by document. So we parse all the documents, pull out all the changes, merge them all together and say, for this actor element, the description field, or actually the register use case has a description field, and Charlie, Ian, and Claire all made comments to the description field. And or I can just say, yes, I'll accept that one, and my changes appear down here. And then when I've made all my changes, pending changes, I can say review them and save it to the model. And that makes it all a lot simpler. So now you can use documents as a way of doing an interactive interaction with your users. Sorry, the sun's finally come out in Wales, so that's good. It's getting daytime. So we found this to be extremely effective at getting to those reviewers who really only want Word documents. And they're keen to give you their feedback. They'll happily go and use track changes and give you their feedback, but it makes the whole thing much easier. And you can imagine doing this, once a week, once every 2 weeks. Notice in this one, by the way, the documents don't have to be the same copies of the same document. So I can send the orange document to one person and the green one to other people. But because it's all tagged up with EA GUIDs and they're universal, then by the time it comes back, I don't care that the documents were different. In this case, the example maybe has them the same, because EA doesn't care. Quite cool. I have to say that was a use case that we hadn't really thought of. It just happened. So, trying to wrap up a bit on tools and techniques before we go and see what the project did is, please don't do this at the end of your modeling. Yeah, don't, a bit like the delivery stage. Don't say, I'll run a workshop and I'll get all the data in and I'll produce the deliverable document and send it to them. They go, well, no, that wasn't right. Engagement is important. It makes them feel that they're part of the process, which of course they are. And if they don't feel they're part of the process, it's going to be hard. So try lots of stuff. Be prepared to change. Yeah, you can colors, diagram, keys. Yeah, any technique you can find to engage with them, whatever works, without making a mess of your model. And remember that no feedback doesn't mean no feedback. No feedback means they didn't even read it. So, and a final tip, I guess, this is from long experience, is when you get some feedback, then find a way to tell those people that you used it, or you ignored it, or you just combined it with somebody else's and they were more important, but do something with it and show them what you did. That will encourage them to say, oh, well, I gave that team the feedback, I'll do it again, because something actually happens to it. So what did the project do about it? So risk management team, we went for that EA Docs approach with the interactive documents. So we produced, they produced EA Docs documents from the model and sent them to the risk management team for them to do updates, and then pulled them back into Revision Manager and stuck them back into the model as required. For the process mapping people, a bit more straightforward, we said that, they wanted links in SharePoint because that's where their existing process was. We said, you don't need to do that. You can put a link in SharePoint and the Prolaborate holds the diagrams, the latest version of the diagram. So that was good. The requirements management people, it wasn't exciting, but the way that we seemed to be able to interact with those people was through the Office MDG, just producing a simple spreadsheet. So nothing very complicated. They would add little bits on and we'd pull it back in, re-import it. So not exciting, but it worked, and that was what worked for them. The decision was also, though, to try and kind of work sideways and say, actually, everybody likes the Prolaborate world. Let's try to change the process such that it's okay for people to look at output in Collaborate rather than having to get a document. And similarly for the requirements management people. So that's kind of where we are with these guys at the moment in the engagement world, is they're trying to kind of push the Collaborate thing sideways. And I think that's going quite well because it's visually quite appealing. There'll always be some who love their documents and don't want to go anywhere else. So let's try and grow that kind of Collaborate world. I've got to a slide here that says it's time for another break, but I've only been going for about half an hour since the last one. I think what I will do is, rather than a break, can I take some questions at this point? So I'm going back through here. I haven't, Jackie's helping me to find out where they are. Up? Yeah. Oh, here we go. So from Ted, in the deliver scale, in order to apply the tools in the right-hand side, Collaborate need ADOCs, how much effort a mid-sized project? Ooh, tools the right-hand side. I mean, Collaborate is, and the ADOCs are different use cases here in terms of the technology. Yes, Collaborate is the big win, but it has a big technology stack. EADocs, very small. It's an add-in. You download it, you install it, you run it. So a much smaller technology stack. So if that's what you mean, then on a small project, the cost of Collaborate may be prohibitive to start with. But keep it, even if you don't do it on day one, keep it at the back of your mind that says, later on, when our model gets a bit bigger and we can do more stuff, then we'll add Collaborate back into the equation. So maybe you start with the ADOCs and you grow into it. And I work with a number of clients who are doing exactly that. In most cases, it's because of the technical restrictions that their IT department can't implement Collaborate fast enough because it's new and crazy technology. Jackie's trying to point me to some more questions. Jacek, hi Jacek. Return of modeling effort. Ooh. Return on modeling effort. All right. How to contact the organization. I don't really understand your question, Jacek. It's about modeling effort. No, yeah, difficult to do these things without a back and forth to clarify the question. Quantify the effort to adapt tools like Collaborate to an existing project. Hopefully I've answered that. Yeah, and Takeshi, I think, is right. Is talking about adding Collaborate later on, and I think that's what most people seem to be doing. So yeah, I can't scroll. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I'm struggling with the technology here. It's yeah. Anyway, I'll hang on for a bit. I'll do another few minutes, and then we'll have a break after another sort of 20 minutes or so. You can't disagree with me because you can't speak to me. So cracking on again with the harvest bit. So remember we had the deliver. We've looked at how to engage with people. The harvest bit's pretty mechanical. So I think we'll do the harvest bit and then have a break before we look at the model bit, which of course is the bit you've all really come to listen to. So the harvesting is an interesting one. It can be a big boost to doing your modeling, or it can be an absolute pain, because with EA, pulling data in is actually quite straightforward. Lots of good ways of pulling in CSV files or spreadsheets, or if you can do it, XML files, using RAS to pull things in from other modeling worlds. Lots and lots of useful ways of doing it. Doing it again, once you've used that data to do something, ooh, what do I do? Stuff's been deleted, stuff's been amended, connections have changed. What do I do? Because the snag is that it's the interesting stuff that changes the fastest. So you've got a dilemma here of, I'd love to use this, I don't know, financial organization data, but it changes every month. So I've got to keep re-importing it. And I've got a plea at the end about why do we have to do this manually all the time. big temptation to say, yes, but this data should be mastered in EA, says you. The rest of the business then says, well, we don't want it to be mastered in EA. We master it in our HR system or in our finance system or in our CMDB. So no, it's not your decision to say it shall be mastered in EA. You're just going to have to pull it in and deal with it. And I find this little kind of a blobby chart as a useful way of assessing a piece of information that I'm thinking about harvesting. So unlike most diagrams, you don't want to be in the top right-hand corner. So I've got a speed of change down the bottom. So these don't change very often. This changes all the time. And how useful it is. So what I really want is things that don't change very much and are really useful. So things up in this corner. What I don't want to have is stuff that's a little bit useful, but not much, but change all the time. So maybe with those, I might just want to forget the whole thing. So I'm going to look at a couple of examples now from this project and others, but they're kind of common things that come from other places. Probably the most useful data you can ever pull in to your EA model is information about your organization, because it's hard to think of any bit of modeling that you do that doesn't involve organization ideas. So they're the swim lanes in a process model. They're the owners of things in business services or business functions. They're just everywhere. Excuse me a moment. So they're probably sourced somewhere else, in our case, in an HR system. And it's one of those in that kind of, it's just annoying. It's a high rate of change, but it's really useful. So really, most modeling teams that decide to do this probably want to pull in that information from an HR system. Yeah, you could have confidentiality issues in your jurisdiction, GDPR if you're in Europe. Do we have GDPR in the UK still? I don't know. I'm still part of Europe. But it's a problem. We decided to do it and said that a quarterly update of that information would be okay. We have no solution yet for things like if a team splits into two, what do we do? And how do we even find out that happened? Because one team has disappeared and another one has come back and they've got different responsibilities. So we're still grappling with how to fix that one, because it's not easy. But we're probably going to do it because it's just so jolly useful having all that information mastered somewhere else. And yes, personal information, don't put human beings in there if you can avoid it. And if you can't avoid it, then find a way of getting a sign off to do that. Lower levels of the architecture, so the actual servers, locations and stuff like that, and software systems and things. Fantastically useful information. Maybe I changed my mind in the usefulness. I haven't put it up there because it's only useful really at the lower levels of architecture and solution architecture, which, by the way, I'm talking about tomorrow. And you've probably got it in your CMDB or your ServiceNow or something like that. And there are, I can't remember if can somebody from the Collaborate team ping me on the chat to say if you have an interface to ServiceNow? I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. I thought there was certainly talk of one, but a direct ping from ServiceNow into EA, which would be fantastic. Really useful stuff. Again, the problem is the deletions, or if something goes away and you just don't get any updates for a while, actually the server is gone. So how do you handle deletes? So that's not a trivial problem. On our project, we decided to do a simple import, and we're going to keep it as a read-only form in EA. And we're not going to handle deletes at the moment because we can't figure out how to do it. But really useful stuff. And I think that's going to be pulled in via a CSV file from memory, I think. This has come up a couple of times where there are standards that you want to be shown to apply to your project. So typically when you're doing things like requirements management, to say, hey, I'm doing this requirement in order to comply with that standard, or that you can import them as a standard requirement or as a compliance requirement or something like that. And it's not massively useful, but I think it helps also with the engagement that says, people who are very familiar with that world will look at that standard and go, "Ah, you're applying ISO 12345. Good for you." So it's good for engagement and kind of useful. The good thing about it, though, is its rate of change is usually fairly low. It will be low because the standards evolve, once every year or two, a new one is issued. So handling updates, not so much of a problem. So you could probably do a match of saying, well, all these sections have reappeared and we'll update those, and that one's gone, so we'll delete that and delete references to it. So you can, the keeping everything up to date problem isn't so bad with this. But I quite like it. And some places you can even get XMI imports of standard models from some industry groups will give you a bit of proper full-on modeling with connectors and elements and tag values and all that good stuff. So all good. So maybe worth doing. This is something that we thought about. Again, a part of engagement, but part of trying to reuse the knowledge from older projects to say they had requirements, they had results, they had some user stories that actually we might want to take reuse, we might want to take inspiration from them. Let's not pretend that everything that happened before EA never happened. So there was quite a big thought process of how we might do that, because obviously the speed of change is zero. You only ever need to do it once because that project happened and nobody can argue. That's it. And it's a bit useful. So worth thinking about. And when we looked at the tools, I'll look again at which of those the project actually did. So importing tools, lots of them, lots and lots and lots. The built-in CSV import is fine for simple stuff. I've never managed to make it work with connectors. I'm fairly sure it doesn't. The model integration for Office, the MDG, it's built into some versions of VA and is a paid for extra on some of the lower versions. You can do imports. As you'd imagine, it's all about Excel. It's got Visio and Word in as well, but it's all about Excel, and it's good. It can put in elements and it can put in connectors and tag values. You can do a proper job with that. There's a bit that says you can pull in things from a Word document. It's not very good. Parsing a Word document that's got flowing prose in it and headings and footers and titles and tables, it's just too hard. And the same really for Visio. Yes, there's a Visio importer. I've made the standard one work with really, really simple diagrams, but never really got any further. Anything complicated, I've had to write code to do it. And even that's not terribly successful, but maybe some value in it. Shout out for EA Docs. That's what puts food on my table and pays my mortgage. Yeah, we do importing of Word documents. And again, not really that much better than the one that's built into the Office MDG. I would say a bit better, but there's only so much you can do. Much more sophisticated way of importing elements and connectors. So we can do that pretty nicely. So that's all good. But if the worst comes to the worst, and if you can't do it any other way, and it's just something I've had to do a while, you have to write some code to do it. So you get out your copy of Visual Studio and you start writing code. And this is a terrible solution because who maintains that code? And it takes a long time to write and it's really complicated. So who owns it at the end? Do I give it to my customer? And what the heck on earth are they going to do with a load of C# code that they don't know how to edit? So not a great solution. So please, Sparx, if you're listening, can we have a full-on automated import utility? Pull together all the different strands of importing of data and make a full suite of it. So I go to a particular location every week and I look for a file like this and I pick the file up and I process it, kind of, if you're from the data warehouse world, ETL, extract, transform and load. So I do an extract, I transform it with the dates and formats and split things apart, and then I load it into EA, and then I could say, oh, I was expecting to see one of those in this list, but it's not there. Oh, maybe it's been deleted, and handle all that kind of stuff. So, and handle any data format I can think of. And think about where the data came from as well, maybe. remember that this actually tag the data that says I came from the CMDB system. I'm not unique. Tag the data saying I am read only in EA. Nobody's allowed to change me. That'd be interesting. Tag it at an attribute level. So if anybody from Sparx wants the requirements for that, I got them. So what did we do? For this project, we decided organization stuff, fine. We do a manual refresh of it using the Office MDG Excel importer. That seemed fine. We got lucky with the hardware and software systems. Somebody else in the organization has already done it. So that was being pulled in. I don't know how, but it was being put into an EA model somewhere else. And so we're going to use Remote Access Server, RAS, to pull that into our models. If you want to know more about RAS, Phil Chudley is doing a talk about it tomorrow. If you're in real time, if you're not in real time, there's a talk by Phil Chudley somewhere. Past projects decided it was all too hard. Nobody really cared enough to do it, so we didn't bother. And then the standards, we actually found an XMI on one of the standards bodies websites, which imported beautifully. Benefits of XMI as a standard way of exporting models, and that produced a really rich model with diagrams and elements and connectors and all kinds of stuff. So not massively useful, as we said, but I think it's going to be, it gives people confidence that we can link back to those safety standards, and we're all good. So that's where we got to. I think before I start on the next session of modeling, we will now have a 10-minute break, and I will return. It's 8:47 in the UK. I will return at 8:57. So have a 10-minute break, go and get a coffee, and we will do the last session. That session, we're going to talk about modeling and draw some kind of conclusions at the end of it all. Okay, so see you shortly. So I'll give it another couple of minutes while I read your questions. So if anybody does have any more questions, please stick them directly onto the Teams chat is probably the way to do it if you're able to do that. Sujath is doing a good job of copying them, I think, from the web chat onto Teams. Yeah, not sure I'm seeing all the latest stuff in here. Right, so I'll start in about another minute or so. If you've all got your coffee, I have my coffee, so life is good. Ah, that's hot. So Jacek, if you're still listening, I want to talk to you about your question about return of modeling effort, because it sounds really interesting, but I don't know what you mean. So this is the drawback of doing questions through chat, is I can't get you to say, please explain, and we'll have a 5-minute conversation about it. So maybe we'll try and do a call later on. And yeah, so I'll start and answer the questions. Question from Bob, who I think we've met over the web before. Benefits of collaborate over Web EA, I would point you to the session that Nizam is doing this afternoon. And the other question about quantifying the effort from Ted Lee, additional effort, collaborate. Nizam is the guy to ask these kinds of questions, because he's doing a talk this afternoon. And if Nizam doesn't know the answer, then nobody knows, because Nizam knows everything about Collaborate. So that would be those. Oh, new messages coming in. Don't try and explain it again, yeah, check. I'll do it later, honest mate. It'll be fine. Okay, we'll carry on. So I'm sorry I'm not doing a great job of answering the questions. I'm finding it very difficult to go from speak mode to read mode on the questions to then speak mode again. I think the brain is getting old. So we should be all back now, and we're looking at the modeling bit. So we've done the delivery, about what it is we're trying to deliver and how. We've done in order to produce that stuff, I need to engage. To do the engagement and put stuff in my model, I might need to do some harvesting. Now, the bit that you probably all came for, which is the modeling part, which I know lots of people are going to do talks about this later. And I know Horst is doing a great talk immediately after me with all kinds of great stuff in it. So I'm going to be finishing my coffee while I listen to Horst doing his talk, because he told me about it last week and it sounds really interesting. So I don't want to cover too much of the same ground that he has, because he's talking a lot more about the doing of the modeling part. But I'm going to touch on a couple of aspects of doing your modeling, which I think are relevant to scaling up what we're doing. Okay, and this is what my guys are into at the moment. So yeah, you know about modeling, but do you know about scaling up modeling? And so I'm just going to share 2 or 3 ideas with you in this area without trying to cover absolutely everything. So there's 2 ways that your modeling can go from here. So you've produced, my guys had produced something reasonable, their first step, and they produced a bit of architecture, and then they went to another world. Yeah, so they had a bit of architecture up here, and then they did some more, and they did some more architecture. And then these crazy people came along and said, I want to do processors, I want to do risk management, and their models were evolving as well. So be aware which dimension you're going in, because as you'd imagine, carrying on doing more of the same is very different from doing radically different stuff. You're going to have to think about it in a very different way, because up here, you're building your experience in that modeling world. You know how to do architecture. You know the kinds of diagrams that seem to be working and what doesn't work. So you can pretty quickly start to evolve how you do your modeling and get it really well organized. Moving then into a whole new world, that's a new set of people with a new set of models and a new set of ideas. So you're going to have to kind of start again with some of this stuff. Sure, you've learned how to use EA and you've learned all the tools that go around the EA world, but you're going to have to write a lot more standards. So don't be surprised if moving into these new worlds is actually quite painful and you have to throw away some of the things you knew before. So that's just a kind of a word of warning of just be aware that the top, more of the same, is obviously going to be easier than changing what you do. So what are the things that I'm going to need when I go into a new modeling style? So we're going to talk a bit later on about meta models. No magic about meta models, it's just what I'm allowed to put in my model. So in addition to, and I think I'm going to cover some of this later on. In fact, I do cover this later on, I've just realized. So I'll skip to the meta models bit, because I want to leave some time at the end to try and answer some of these questions properly. So meta model just says, what is it that I need to put into my model to deliver what I need to deliver? And also to engage with the people I need to engage with. So in theory, my model is only the stuff that the delivery requires. So the wrong answer is go and talk to your modeler and say, what should go in the model? Oh, pick me. I want to put this and I want to put that and I want to put this. And oh, you can model that and we can model the other. And I see this all the time, is people one day kind of get the vision thing of EA, which is great. It's a lovely moment when they go, but we could put everything into EA. And yeah, you could, but you shouldn't. Not yet. You should probably put in there what you need to deliver. So it's the, what do we call it? Minimum viable model. I'm liking that more and more. So let's think about what that feels like to take these deliverable things of spreadsheets or documents or charts or collaborate dashboards and figure out what should go into that meta model. So I could say I found this idea of requirement, and I know about requirements because I've found those in UML, because I know what UML language is. Actually, I don't think UML does contain a requirement. I think I'm wrong on that. EA does, but UML doesn't, but I could be wrong. But I can put it into a bucket. I can say, I know what requirements are. So I'm listening out to what my delivery says I need, and I'm matching it with my knowledge of the tools and the modeling languages. And I can kind of fit them in more or less, but I don't want to do any kind of crazy stuff to make it fit. So if I come across the idea of a process, I go, I know what a process is. There's a BPMN idea of a process. And if you, as an organization, want me to deliver something that isn't a BPMN process, and we've decided that BPMN is the language we shall use, I'm going to have to change your mind. Awkward. Or I may have to add extra bits and pieces into the BPMN idea of a process. But I probably won't. That would be kind of weird. And I find the idea of, I don't know, the priority of a thing. Well, that looks like the priority of a process, so I'll stick that into there. And I may, though, not get as lucky as that. I may find my delivery needs to be this funky looking table. So where does all that stuff go to? So here I'm going to have to do something a little bit cleverer. I'm going to have to do things like saying, well, I don't really want my requirement to be called REQ134 do stuff. I want it to have a name, do stuff, and I want it to have an alias, REQ134. So I'm going to have to parse that into two pieces. And remember that when I come to deliver, I'll put them back together again. So this is what we mean by kind of doing meta modeling. And I know, because I've done data modeling and things like this before, that I can't make the stakeholder Fred an attribute of that requirement. That would be weird, wouldn't it? That you wouldn't ever do that, because we know that stakeholder is a thing in the world. It deserves its own element with a connector between the requirement and the stakeholder. This isn't rocket science, is it? Well, it's not rocket science for this example. Your examples probably won't be as easy. So I come across a cost code. Well, what's that then? Is that a cost code of the stakeholder? Is that a cost code? It's probably a cost code of the stakeholder. There is no cost code idea in Enterprise Architect, so I'm going to have to make it a tagged value of my stakeholder element. And my stakeholder element I might get from Archimate, to say I'll use the Archimate idea of a stakeholder. Yeah. So are you getting the idea now of taking the delivery, analyzing it, and then saying, this is how I need to do my modeling, how I'm creating my meta model? I may get really unlucky and come across some kind of random diagram. I once came across a cracking one of these at a client many years ago, and they actually showed me a diagram. It looked much like this, with sort of triangles and blue bits and green bits. And they said it was a process model, as it turned out. And they said, Ian, can you tell us what's the difference between the blue squares and the orange squares? And I said, well, one of them's blue and one of them's orange. This is the kind of talent you pay good money for. I said, of course, I've got no idea what this diagram means. It's just a diagram with blobs and lines on it, written for them by some very expensive consultants. I can't help. So it's just now impossible to parse that and produce from it some idea of what I'm looking at. It may be just some random beautiful diagram that somebody's drawn with lovely clip art and stuff. And it just may be too hard to pull that in, to take it apart and make the triangles and the squares and the circles into different elements and then put the diagram back together again. Maybe just too hard. So the right answer for that might be, I just stick it in a bucket and not throw it, well, I'll put a little bucket in there, but just say, I can't put this in my meta model just yet. I need it to be part of my delivery, because my delivery says this diagram is really important. Just keep it as a graphic somewhere. Maybe keep it as with a link to the source of the graphic so I can edit it, but let's not try and assume that absolutely everything in every deliverable can immediately be put into my model. I would go back and find the people who wrote the diagram and say, are any of the things in this diagram things we already know about, or is it a whole new world, or have you just invented your own notation? More likely. So I can use EA things like link documents and just keep it in there and just not try, because this is maybe what some of the questions have been thinking about this morning, is keep that modeling effort as small as possible. It may take me days or weeks to figure out how to deconstruct that diagram and put it all into EA and then put it back together again and then deliver it. Maybe easier to keep it as a graphic and just put it into the document. So I'm more for keeping things simple. And then finally, I may get an idea of there's this term, this idea that I've never heard of, gadget, thing, something that just isn't part of BPMN. It's not an idea in Enterprise Architect. It's not in UML. It's not in it's just not anywhere. It's just something you invented. And we had lots of these. Remember in the previous example, that risk management framework I was talking about, they had a whole load of stuff in there that was clearly very, very well thought through and did the job and modeled what they wanted. Wasn't any part of any modeling language I'd ever seen. So we had to create our own stuff. So that stuff goes into the our modeling language. So you can, those of you who know about EA can guess where this is all going. It's going towards doing an MDG and something like that. So it's okay to extend the language, but, and there's the big but here, is we extended the language because between us we knew BPMN, UML, Archimate, and a few other languages, and said there is no risk management framework idea in any of those languages that looks like what we need it to be. So we invented it as a new thing from a position of knowledge. It's really easy to look at something and go, oh, I've never heard of one of them. I'll just put it into our modeling language. And then later on, somebody says, EA has already got one of them, or BPMN's got one, or there's an Archimate idea. It's called something slightly different, but the idea is there. So please understand what all these modeling languages are that have got these ideas in there, and only if it doesn't occur somewhere else, then add it to your modeling language. Don't do it from ignorance. It's just poor modeling technique. So now we've got a bunch of stuff into our meta model. We've decided which bits of BPMN or Archimate or UML or basic and EA ideas we're going to use on SysML or whatever hell we're going to use. What do I do now? Because those languages are big. UML is big, BPMN is huge, SysML is big, Archimate is enormous and terribly complicated. So my suggestion at this point is, don't say you're going to use all that language, just use the bits that you need. So there's a big job out there for somebody, particularly in the Archimate world, to say, here's an Archimate subset that works for most purposes. I've got one for BPMN and it's say 20% of the size of the language and will fix easily 90% of problems. I've not seen one in the Archimate world. I'll be interested on the chat if anybody has seen a simplified Archimate, because I've only ever seen one client who tried to use all of Archimate and they failed because it was too complicated. So get those, yes, say I am using SysML, UML, BPMN, but I'm using a strict subset. And I'm using, if I'm using the idea of a user story, it's a user story based out of the UML idea of a use case, and we'll know what it means. So that plus your own modeling language stuff, you're now saying, right, this is the rules and the regulations about modeling it. Okay. So avoid trying to put in extra stuff that you think might be useful, whether they're new element types or connections, because you're doing it with the purest of motives. You're doing it because you want to be nice to people and kind to your future colleagues and your current colleagues, but don't do it. Similarly, things like Archimate and BPMN have loads and loads of types of diagram that you probably don't need. They're still there. You're not deleting them. You're not saying this is forever, that I'm never going to use the, what's it called? It's a Phil Chudley teaches it sometimes, a BPMN kind of collaboration diagram. Never understood what it's for. Probably my fault, not yours. But I can know if I ever do find a situation to use it in, I can always start using it again. I'd far rather have a modeling environment which is small and simple that I can extend using things the language has already described than start with everything and people don't understand what I'm trying to do. Modeling is about communication, and these languages are supersets, and nobody ever needs everything. So add it in later. Okay. So what should I expect to find in my meta model? Because remember, the meta model isn't a big clever idea. And I think Horst is going to talk about that next, about what he expects to find. I'd be interested to compare his list and mine. The easy thing that you would expect to find in a meta model is what are the element types and stereotypes, which in UML terms are almost the same thing. And similarly, how can I connect those types of elements together with what kinds of connectors? That's fine. Metadata, getting cleverer now. Which EA fields do I use, or which do I not use? So there's various EA fields like keywords that I've just never used. Doesn't mean to say they're not useful. Are you going to use them or you're not going to use them? If you're not going to use them, say so in your meta model, which by the way should be a class diagram. Just saying. And just say, don't use this field. It's there in EA. I don't know of a way in EA to say you can't even see it, I don't think you can hide it. Similarly with tag values. Particularly important is something like a BPMN, where there are no measures attached to processes and activities by the BPMN language. You have to add your own tag values. Particularly true in the lower levels of Archimate when you're looking at servers and business functions and things like that, where there is just no tag values at all defined by the language. You may have zillions of things if you're importing that data from a CMDB, so you're going to have to invent a lot of tag values. Fantastic. Diagram types and what they contain is another part of your meta model. So your meta model should say, by the way, if you're an Archimate person, they'll call it a viewpoint, whatever. It's a diagram type. And we should say in our meta model that this diagram type must contain these kinds of things, may contain these, and by implication must not contain anything else. This kind of goes against EA's style, which says, hey, I create a diagram and I can put anything on the diagram, which is not good. Usually it gives people too much freedom, and they abuse it and put random stuff on there and start connecting it in random ways. Much better to say, hey, this is a so-and-so diagram. It has this on it, and it has those, and it can have lots of them, and it has these kind of connectors, and that's it. Oh, and a key, or legend or something that explains how to use it. And something else that I only realized, I have to say, by writing this presentation was something else I can say about types of diagrams is what they're for. And there can be for, I think, any of those four purposes. They can be a diagram that I propose to put into the delivery, into my delivery mechanism, be it Collaborate, be it a document, to say this is what consumers of this knowledge will expect to see. First one. So if it's a process model, it's the process flow, maybe the high level process flow without all the detail. Or I might have a different type of diagram which actually is never intended to be delivered as part of an end deliverable, but I just use it for engagement. So it may be a subset of what the main diagram says. It may look at it from a different point of view, because we know that EA is fantastic for doing that kind of stuff. Lets me look at the same information from different angles, and that may help my engagement. So that diagram type might say, this is not intended for production. It's not that you're not allowed to, it's just that's not the intention. It's there for engagement. Another set which are just for navigation, which we talked about before. Very, very useful things, help people find their way around the model. Probably not intended for delivery, might help navigate engagement a bit. And then the final set are just for modeling. So you've probably done the same thing as I have occasionally of, I want to relate a whole bunch of these things to a whole bunch of those things, and there's lots and lots of different connector types, so I can't use a relationship matrix. I'll just throw them all onto a diagram and connect them all up. And the diagram looks awful, but that's fine because it's not intended for anybody else to use. And it would be great, wouldn't it, Sparx, if you're paying attention, to be able to flag those as kind of private diagrams or something, or not intended for use. There should be a way of flagging it somehow. Maybe we could just use a stereotype or something. So element types, connector types, metadata, diagram types. Next is rules. The rules start to get a bit cleverer. And I'm hoping that Horst is going to talk about this next, because we talked about it last week and it sounded really interesting. More complex rules that say if an A is connected to a B, it must be done by this connector type. But if an A and a B are connected, then an A can't be connected to a C as well. Now, you can't easily say that any other way other than by writing out a rule. Yes, you could use object constraint language, but frankly, I stopped being able to read OCL about 25 years ago. So there could be some more complex rules. How you implement them, tricky. Horst has a way of doing that. We have a way of doing it in Model Expert as well. But it's getting pretty clever at this point, and I would look very strangely at an organization that had loads and loads and loads of rules about their meta model. It's probably getting too elaborate. Certainly as part of my meta model, I want to see some examples. I think a meta model without examples, how am I going to understand it? And a meta model that I don't understand isn't very useful. And I probably want some training, and I want to put that training onto my intranet where people can find it when they need it. I want to have links to it that I can put into diagrams that say, hey, if you don't understand this diagram, follow this link and go and look on SharePoint and you'll see an example. So that's what I expect to find in a meta model. How you implement that meta model is a different question, which we'll look at in a second. So I'll be interested in the comments, which I will now handle at the very end in the questions, if you think there's anything else should go in there. That's my kind of top of head subset. But the revelation from this week was different types of diagram for different purposes. So I've worked out what my meta model is. I've written it down as an EA, as a UML class diagram, because that's what meta model should look like. Maybe in the meta model style diagram that you can draw with EA, there's a meta modeling type of diagram, or just a simple class diagram. Now I want to implement it, because a meta model on a bit of paper is useless. A meta model delivered to the people that are actually doing the modeling is where it gets interesting. So here's where you can save yourself some effort. If you decided, based on looking at your deliverable documents, thinking about your engagement, that actually all you really need is a subset of BPMN, life is good, because EA's got some really great stuff. These things called perspectives, where you can switch off the bits of the language you don't want to do. Only works if you're using a subset of a language that's a standard language that EA implements. And let's face it, EA implements all the languages. So you can switch off different connector types, different element types, just using perspectives and save it in the model. That's it. And say to people, you're using Archimate, but you're using this perspective, and they'll only see in the toolboxes the things that they're allowed to use and the connectors that they're allowed to use. Yeah, they can screw it up and put the wrong things in there if they really try, but most people only do that by accident. So that's a really quick way. If your delivery says just a simple subset of an existing language, easy, do it with perspective. So standard EA function, no MDGs, no clever stuff. So it's all existing EA stuff, and it's a really, really quick and simple solution. If you then got something which is a subset, but you've got some extra bits and pieces, so in our case we had this risk framework to put in that wasn't standard, then you could create one of these things called an MDG. I'm sure that in the next few days somebody will be talking about MDGs. It's usually Phil Chudley, because he's Mr. Genius MDG person. But it's basically a way of defining your own modeling language. And go and look at it on the EA website. There's lots and lots of good articles about how to do it. If your meta model is stable, this is a great solution, because you basically get your own flavor of Archimate plus other thing, Archimate with a bit of BPMN, with a bit of something else, all together in one place, and you can get diagram types and toolboxes and all that kind of stuff. It's work, and it becomes a lot of work if it's not stable, because iterating that becomes quite hard. You have to do a lot more steps in order to create an MDG. If your subset and your local changes are still evolving, I would, because I wrote it, point you towards Model Expert. Model Expert has a different approach to the MDG. It lets you create a meta model as a class diagram, which lives in your repository, and that's the rules that get used real time when you're doing your modeling. There is no step of, with the MDG, of sort of almost compiling it and then putting it and importing it and then using it. Model Expert says, there's your rules of what your meta model needs to look like, apply it real time. So it's much better if you're evolving your meta model, and at the end, Model Expert can spit out an MDG or the beginnings of an MDG if it stabilizes. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but you do need something. These, by the way, are the mechanical bits of the solution. Just the A's connect to B's, but they don't connect to C's kind of ideas, and have you filled in the tag values? That's just a part of it. There's another whole part of it, which is, are they the right A's and the right B's and the right D's? And does it make sense? Is it written in a way that people can understand? That's the content bit that is part of your model governance, which is a whole other subject. So fastest ever solutions of doing MDGs. So here's remember, Model Expert is what pays the bills. So here's some Model Expert examples. So you get a dashboard thing that says, hey, this is what's happened. This is the free bit, actually. We give this away. Give it away. How crazy are we? You get this dashboard that says, this is what's happening in this package in my model, and you get lots of, what kind of connectors and diagrams, elements you're using, and how complex is my meta model, and what diagrams am I using. This is all free. Go to eamodelexpert.com and download it for nothing at all. And it'll draw you this diagram as well, I think, in the free version. It says, this is what my meta model looks like of the modeling I'm already doing. And the paid for version lets you take that and say, oh, actually, I don't want that connector type there, and I don't want this one here, and I don't want one of those. You delete them and say, there you go, that's my meta model, please. Apply it to the rest of this model. Easy as that. When I do that, it will review my diagrams for me and say, oh, you've made a mistake here. There's a default value missing, or that's not in the reference model. You've made a special requirement here that doesn't exist in our meta model, or the value is missing, or there's a connector that's wrong. So it'll check these things real time against the model that you've stored. So end of sales pitch. So the final idea I want to explore with you is sharing amongst models, and this is probably the biggest problem that I see with people growing their EA modeling teams. Meta models, people can usually find their way around that by good governance processes and a little bit of MDGs and some scripting and some perspectives and things like that. There are ways of muddling through that on a smaller scale. This is the one that I think people run into the fastest, because it's one of those areas where you've got to change your behavior, and you have to do that in order to burn through and grow this model to the size that you need. And I'm going to explore really two possible solutions, really, and I'll mention some of the other ones, because having multiple models is all very jolly, because that may be your default solution. I've got 4 different teams. I'll each give them their own repository, and that's fine. It seems okay. They're doing different kinds of modeling, maybe, probably okay. But at some point, I probably want to pull those together in some kind of a shared world, such that those models can be seen by each other and can kind of can share knowledge and can link to each other, because having them all as little separate worlds is probably not great. So there's lots of good reasons to have multiple models. It may be your team needs to be independent. They may be doing something very secret that nobody else can know about. They may be in a different physical location. that can't really access a shared model because their internet connection is too small. And it gives them a sense of kind of independence. We're doing our own thing. The downside of having many models, I think, is if you did keep multiple ones, you've got, how do I manage them all separately? How do I apply the same standards? How many can I actually scale this up to? And I'm doing a whole session tomorrow morning, again, a 7 o'clock start, looking at solution architecture in particular, which is where I see this happening most severely, where there aren't 4 here, there are 40. So you can imagine if I want 40 different project teams making 40 sets of business changes, do I really want to have 40 repositories? I know Daniel Siegel from Liba, the Lemon Tree expert, will probably say, I can do that for you, and probably he can, but there are probably easier ways of doing it. So the choice here really is a binary one. You either have one and only one model, or you have more than one. There is no kind of halfway house. Okay, you may have a play area and a backup and a staging area, but I mean, one model that everybody uses. So I'm going to look at some of the possible solutions here to how we might do that. Because I think you're one or the other. You're not in sort of halfway house here. To me, there is a brick wall. You've either got right-hand side, multiple teams doing their work in the same physical repository, left-hand side, different physical repositories. And there's no kind of fuzzing, I don't think, in between. And I'm going to look at the, I like that little building the wall here. The 2 flavors of the solution. I'm going to cover some of this stuff tomorrow morning again. So I'm going to skip through this fairly quickly. And you can all come back at 7 o'clock UK time tomorrow and listen to me talking about solution architecture. I'm probably going to get into terrible trouble here because I'm going to say that some bits of Sparx maybe aren't brilliant, which obviously is heresy. But very quickly. So in the distributed world, let's just do it by, you have your repository, I have mine, and we'll send XMIs to each other. Madness. It works informally if you and I know exactly what we're doing. It absolutely does not scale. Even if you put a version control system like a SVN or a GitHub on top, just using raw XMI is crazy. Do not even think about doing it. Raz, Phil Chudley will talk about tomorrow, so I would entirely defer to him. I think it has a place in this kind of shared repository world. If all I'm doing is pulling down read-mostly information, and I really don't need to have that single version of the truth across all my projects, I think Raz has a place. I mean, we're using it in the project I've just been describing, so it is a good solution to a subset of the problem. Lemon Tree, I'm assuming that Horst will talk about Lemon Tree tomorrow. Sorry, later on today, and if not, why not? It's the full solution for a distributed team. It is a full-scale solution with all kinds of very clever stuff. I wouldn't even pretend to be able to describe all the things it can do. I've seen them make it do the most astonishing things. I think, we were talking about this with the Lemon Tree team last week, and one of the differentiators between it and the one I'm about to talk about is they understand this is the world as it is now. They can go back and figure out the world as it was 3 weeks ago, 3 years ago, because that's the level of detail of information that they keep. But each team has their own model, and there's a master which is very, very well protected from stupid changes. So lots and lots of controls. Go and look at a Lemon Tree video. They've got some tremendous stuff. So if you want to have lots and lots and lots of models, separate repositories, all kind of collaborating with each other, you're going to need something like Lemon Tree. So that's my if you're a distributed team, Lemon Tree is the answer. Okay. If you're on the other side, then you've decided for whatever reason, I want to have a single repository, single version of the truth. EA baselines, this is not really what EA baselines is for, to control multiple versions of the same set of processes being changed by many projects. That's just not what it's for. Good for saving stuff, but it doesn't have a branching, I suppose it has a merging idea, but yeah, it's just not the right tool. We have also seen instances used occasionally for some solution architecture applications, but again, it's not a branch merge solution. And similarly, the time-aware modeling, which is what we all hoped that Sparx would implement to fix this problem, it's kind of a bit of a solution. It can't have things like parallel branches. You can't have two different bits of the organization branching the same idea. And so it doesn't seem to work. And I couldn't make it give me a single view of what's happening. So I don't think that's a real solution. Hence, we built this thing called Portfolio Manager, which is new this year. And its target market is tens or hundreds of projects, where you couldn't have tens or hundreds of different repositories. It would just get unmanageable. And it uses a completely different approach from Lemon Tree. So it's model-based versioning, not code-based versioning. So it's a single version of the truth in one model at one time. But unlike Lemon Tree, it has no idea of what happened in the past. We, at the moment, don't keep that information. So it knows about the world now and multiple futures. So I'll be demonstrating Portfolio Manager tomorrow, so I won't do any more detail. Final message really is, if you've got that scaling up solution, that scaling up need of multiple different teams using the same EA model world, it's either Lemon Tree or Portfolio Manager. You could maybe make it work in other worlds, but it's just too hard. So pick one. Lemon Tree, if you need or want to have different repositories. Portfolio Manager, if you want to keep it all in one place. So they're just different use cases. Don't hear me say one is better or worse than the other. I think, and we had a long conversation with the Lemon Tree team last week, they're just different solutions for different problems. So you need to understand them both and go, my problem is a Lemon Tree one. So they're very, very strong, for example, in the SysML world where you're building safety critical software. So this is a reassuringly good solution if you're building safety critical software. Lemon Tree does that. If you're doing solution architecture, I'm going to argue that maybe Portfolio Manager is a lighter weight and robust solution to that problem. But you need to think about one or the other, because otherwise it's madness. That then is about all I have to say. I offer you these 4 ways of thinking about what you're modeling as a way to stop the problem from being, I've got a million things to think about, and gradually tease it apart into some separate areas of concern. So first, think about delivery. What am I delivering? How am I going to deliver it? And what does that delivery contain? And only when I've thought about that, start feeding that into my meta model that informs how my modeling should work and what kind of rules I have. Engagement as an idea of, I may need a whole other set of ideas and diagrams and mechanisms to engage with the people that are telling me what I need to do. So engagement there is, to me, is separated from the delivery. Maybe the same document in draft, maybe a completely different mechanism. So keep those apart. And harvesting, if the boxes had a size depending on their importance, harvesting would be a bit smaller, but it's still there. If you can pull useful information into EA and reuse it, then you're going to be fitting EA much better into the rest of your modeling, into the rest of your organization's knowledge world, because EA can't be an island that contains everything. The more it can pull in and the more it can feed out to other parts of the world, the more successful it's going to be. And if you're scaling up your modeling, then you need to think about meta models in more detail and how to apply them, MDGs or Model Expert. And you need to think about how to share that information across different modeling teams. So that in 4 boxes is 20 years of experience of doing EA stuff. So I don't know how well this is going to work. I will try to handle any more questions in the last sort of 10 or 20 minutes or so. So I've got a thing here that says new messages. From Roger Taylor, am I showing the slides in this session? Yes, they will be available, and the video of everything will be available on the interwebs at some point. Takeshi coming back with some stuff. Quantifying the rule. Jacek's complicated question. Jacek always asks interesting but complicated questions. So I need to think about that some more. I'm not seeing any questions here that I feel the need to answer. Oops, some more coming in. Takeshi says, can we use Prolaborate and Portfolio Manager at the same time in the same model? Yes. That was an easy question, Takeshi, wasn't it? Yes. Because Portfolio Manager basically just uses elements and connectors. It doesn't use any special magic behind the scenes. It just creates has an MDG, so an add-in, sorry, that lets you create more connectors and deep copies of things. Absolutely, Prolaborate can go on top. We probably should, I am talking to Nizam already about making Prolaborate understand what it finds in the model to say, that's not just any old connector. That's a connector that means that this element, this process here is a branch of that process there. So there's lots of good things that we could do in Prolaborate to make it even better. There's also some views in Portfolio Manager which I think are best delivered through Prolaborate. So one of the things that I'll show tomorrow about Portfolio Manager is it lets you work out your project dependencies based on who's branched what. So it aggregates all that up and says, hey, project A depends on project B because it's making use of a thing that project B is going to deliver. That kind of information is pretty high level stuff and is much better delivered in Prolaborate. And we need a few little technical tweaks to make that work. So yeah, Prolaborate absolutely is a much better view into Portfolio Manager ideas. Do I have a cloud security modeling example? No. Security is clearly dark magic. So I think if everybody's okay, I'm at the end of the questions. I will stick around though in the chat world. If you want to do a question, I'll type answers and stuff in there rather than trying to do it one to many. So, although Jackie's waving at me. The last one. The last slide. Oh, there's a last slide. Hey, she's right. Thank goodness Jackie's here. So, oh yeah, I remember. This is what pays my mortgage. There's some offers here on, if you go to the various websites, you can get, what discount are we giving, Jackie? 50%? Good heavens. Half price licenses. Oh dear. Okay, well, if you're quick and use that product code, that little discount code, you can get 50% off of EA Docs. So the collaboration edition of EA Docs was that one that did the interactive documents. Professional edition is the basic one. Corporate edition is the one that has an Excel thing in it. Model Expert is the thing that was doing the funky dashboards and checking your diagrams and all that kind of stuff. So, and Portfolio Manager is available for a free download at the moment because we're still in the beta testing stage. Yeah, and so those are the URLs you can go to find those things. So I didn't talk about Sparx in the cloud much. That's our hosting proposition for hosting these things. So I'll leave that on the screen because that's what I've been told to do. Oh, question from Lawrence. Portfolio Manager works on top of ProCloud Server? No, Portfolio Manager works on top of a desktop version of EA, not as part of ProCloud Server. So it's a desktop add-in, not a. So anybody who's working in that world will need to have a copy of Portfolio Manager. ProCloud Server can then show that information elsewhere. Yes, and of course, and it obviously works if you're hosting it in the cloud, as all of these EA Docs, Model Expert, Portfolio Manager all work in the cloud if you're doing a full cloud implementation, which you should be doing, by the way. If you're not, you should be. Yeah, I think I'm done. I don't know anymore. So I'd have to make things up. So I will close down the video part now and go into the chat. Over to you, Sparx India.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Sorry, thank you, Ian. So thanks, Ian, for the wonderful presentation, and thanks everyone for your time during the session. Hope it is very informative and give a deeper insights into the topic. Ian, thank you so much for your session. We have got a great attendance and everyone was very active during the session. So you always do that to keep all participants intact with you. So everyone, if you have any further questions regarding the session, please feel free to talk to Ian in the Teams link that have been posted in the chat window for all your reference. If anyone is having any question or any difficulties in connecting to Teams, please reach us at registrations@eaglobalsummit.com. Thanks once again, everyone, and looking forward to host you the next session very soon. Thank you, Ian. Thanks for the wonderful session.